Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us this morning for this webinar. I'm Allison Taylor, and I'm here with my husband, Tom, and we have a company called Pictures and Stories, and we help people take their life stories and put them into beautiful coffee table books. And we have created this series of webinars to go along with our book called How to Save Your Life, One Chapter at a Time. And this will be the final webinar in this series of webinars that go along with the book. We will be doing other webinars in the future and would love to have you join us on those as well. We will be sending out information on those webinars in the future as long as you are on our mailing list. If you are not on our mailing list but you would like to be, you can go to our website at picturesandstories.com, all one word. And also, if you have any questions about any of this, you're welcome to email us at allison@picturesandstories.com or also tom@picturesandstories.com. We'd be happy to answer your questions or give you any help that you need as you go along in this process of creating a book out of your life stories. And our final topic today is the one that seems to trip people up the most and the one that we have the most questions on. So there's a lot of information to cover today. We will be talking about how to take the stories that you've already written and prepared and to take your pictures that you've already properly scanned and organized and put them together into a book and what your options are for doing that. There's a lot of information today, and but we also would like to leave a lot of time for questions at the end, so we may be going through some of it a little bit quickly. If you have any questions as we go along, please type them into your chat window and we will address them at an appropriate time. We will also be leaving time at the end for questions. So just by way of review, we'll talk a little bit about some of the things we covered in last week's webinar and in previous webinars of how to get to this point, to make sure that we're organized enough to be able to start the layout process of our book. So the first thing we want to make sure is that you're properly organized, that you have everything complete and ready to go before you start laying out your book. Because the more organized you are, the less time it's going to take you to do your layout, the less it's going to cost you, especially if you are hiring a designer or having someone else help you with your book, and the less frustration you will have. It takes so much longer to try to organize things as you are laying out your book rather than if you have it all organized and perfectly sort of set up before you start. You will be a much happier person, trust me. And the other thing that we emphasized last week is while you're in the process of writing your stories and going through your pictures, that you want to be sure to keep those two things separate until the last moment when you're ready to put them together to create a book. So you're going to work on your stories, and that doesn't mean that you can't work on your stories and work on your pictures at the same time. There's definitely a collaboration between those two tasks. You're going to be writing your stories, you're going to be working with your timeline and your story notes and fleshing out those story notes, writing your stories and then finding an order and to put them in, writing any transitions, editing. So as you're doing this whole writing process, you're also going to be scanning your pictures, going through your pictures, deciding which ones you want to use for your book. You're going to be doing those things simultaneously. However, one thing we want to stress is that what you don't want to do is to write your stories in your word processor, and as you are writing and as you're going along, trying to put those pictures in your word processing document at the same time that you're writing. You are just setting up a huge headache for yourself if you try to do it that way. And yet, a lot of people who, if they don't know any other way, that's the way that a lot of people go about it, and it ends up being very frustrating for them. We've had many clients come to us who have started trying to create a book that way and are getting very frustrated, and so they come to us for help to put their book together. So just be sure that you keep those two elements separate. So first of all, you're going to ask yourselves, is my text ready and are my pictures ready? So here's how you know that your text is ready for you to actually get to the layout stage. First of all, are your stories in order? And even before that, are your stories finished? It doesn't mean that once you start layout that you can't make any changes to your text, that you can't change some spelling or even add, or delete a sentence or two or change your mind on some things. But the more that you have your text complete and you have your stories proofread and put in the order that you want them in, make sure that any transitions are written between chapters, any of that kind of thing, the more that you have that completed in your word processing document or just have that ready to go, the less hassle it's going to cause you after you've started your layout. Have your stories been edited for content? Have you been through it again to make sure that there's if there's anything of a sensitive nature in there, that it says exactly what you want it to say and that it's going to have the intended effect? That's a very important thing, to make sure that your stories are going to say what you want to say in the way that you want to say them. And are your stories organized into chapter divisions, or do you have titles, subtitles, that kind of thing? If you're going to use them, you don't necessarily have to have your book laid out in chapters. But if that's something that you want to do, you want to make sure that you know where those chapter breaks are going to occur. And Tom, feel free to chime in at any time here. I tend to be a microphone hog, so. Okay, is your text ready? You want to take your draft out for a walk. We talked about this before in the webinars about writing your stories. But a great thing to do, if you haven't done it already, is to read your entire manuscript out loud to yourself and see what it sounds like. Is there anything that's not quite working? Is there anything that you want to improve? And also, if you want to have somebody that you really trust read it and give you some feedback before you actually start getting your book ready for print. And again, I want to emphasize that you have someone that you trust, not someone who's going to be overly critical, but also someone who will be honest about what they think, and to not let that trip you up too much. You want to make sure that whoever is reading it, that you take their comments into consideration, but it doesn't mean that you have to rewrite your book if they think there's something wrong with it. Just evaluate that within yourself to really see if that's what you want to do. And the last thing is just make sure that your manuscript has been proofread. You will have another chance to proofread it after you've done your layout to make sure that there aren't any last-minute punctuation changes, that kind of thing. But mostly you just want to make sure that it's in pretty good shape that way. And please have a human being other than yourself read your manuscript for typos and proofreading errors, because when you've read it over and over yourself so many times, your eyes tend to just skip over things that might be obvious to someone else. So it's always good to have somebody else look at your manuscript for proofreading errors. And also don't rely on strictly on your spell check software in your word processing program, because as we've seen before, there are a lot of errors that spell checks do not catch. So you want to make sure that you have a human being look at that. Okay, the next thing to ask yourself is, are your photos ready to put in your book? Are they properly scanned for print? We talked about that quite a bit in a couple of other webinars. And are your photos roughly organized, at least, into the folders or chapter divisions as your book chapters will be organized? You don't necessarily have to have your photos all in the exact order that they're going to go in your book, but you want to make sure that you can find those pictures easily so that you know where they are when you're ready to drop a photo into your book. We talked before about scanning at a proper resolution for print, and that would be a minimum of 300 pixels per inch at the size that you want your photo to appear in your book. So here's just an example. If you have a photo that's 2 inches by 3 inches and you want that to appear about the same size in your book, then you can scan it at 300 pixels per inch on your scanner. If you want to blow it up, or if you're going to be cropping it and zooming in on a part of the photo, you need more pixels than that. So you can scan it at 600 or even 1200 if you are going to blow it up bigger. So that's very important to make sure that your photos are going to look good in your printed book when you have it printed on nice glossy paper on a high quality printer. If there are errors in your photo, it will call attention to those errors. The quality of the printing will make those show up. Whereas something might look great on your screen, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to look equally good in print. So you need to make sure that you have the proper resolution. If you want more information about that, you can go to our blog at picturesandstories.com. There are many articles on there about scanning techniques, that type of thing. So feel free to check that out because there's some good information there. This is an infographic that I just created a week or so ago. It basically talks about a funnel method where you start big, where you scan big, and then you can make smaller copies for web use. But you want to make sure that you have those nice big high-resolution scans for printing your book. If you have some photos that the only place you can get that photo is off of the internet, off of a family blog or Family Search or Ancestry, or if that's the only place that you're going to be able to get that photo and you don't have access to a high-resolution photo, you can still use it, but just make sure that you keep it small in your book. You're not going to be able to blow it up and get a very good quality.
As you say, or a lower resolution photo that may have been taken on a cell phone or something where it was set for a lower quality, or a camera that at the time you may have had a lower quality setting. You may not have the opportunity to make that photo as large printed in your book.
Right, and that's a really great point. And most cell phones now, you can get a really pretty high quality image off of your cell phone. The problem is that when you've got this great, nice, big, 4,000 pixel resolution photo on your cell phone, but if you email it to someone else, usually it will compress it down and make it smaller as it's sending it. So find whatever setting on your cell phone to keep it at its original resolution if you're going to use it for print. And that's a good thing to remember. Okay, have you created a list of captions for the photos that are going to go into your book? We talked about this last week as well. This is just a Word document where on the left in the red you can just type in the name of the photo, the image file name, and then next to it just type whatever you want the caption to read. This way, if you have this in a separate Word document, you can actually cut and paste these from your Word document into the caption boxes or caption areas in your layout program. Or you can also have the captions resident in the metadata of your digital photo. As we talked about last week, different programs, whether you're using just Windows Explorer or Mac Finder, or if you're using a photo organization tool like Picasa or Adobe Bridge or something like that, they all have areas where you can put in either a caption or a title or some descriptive information into the metadata of your digital file, and that will actually move with the photo, so that if you make a copy of that digital file, if you upload it somewhere, send it to somebody, or make a copy of it on your computer, that metadata should travel with the photo and be resonant with that photo. So that's a great place to put your caption information. You can also go to the caption box and you can cut and paste information out of there into your caption box in your layout program as well. Another thing that's helpful to do, it's not completely necessary, but it's quite helpful, is to create an index print. Basically, you just take all of your digital photos that you have ready for your book, and you're going to make a contact sheet or an index print of just thumbnails of all the photos that you have with their file names underneath it. And then you can write on that to, circle the ones you want, cross out the ones you don't want, make notes on it to yourself. That's a really handy thing to have a physical copy of it. Like I said, it's not necessary, but it's very helpful. There is an article on our blog about how to create an index print just using Windows software. It's relatively easy to do that, and then you can just print it out on your home printer. Also, if you're using Picasso or Bridge or any of those things, they also have ways to create an index print or a contact sheet. So it's a handy thing to have.
Let me just make a comment on the index print. I think many people find these helpful, and I know as we get pictures printed at Costco or Walgreens or some of these type of places, they'll often include an index print. But I found that those pictures are often so small, and the title or the names that are automatically assigned by some of those places are so obscure that they may not be helpful. And so it's nice to have an index print that has the index pictures large enough that you can see and tell a lot about what is in that photo, who the people are. As you see on this picture on the screen, there may be a newspaper article where you're not necessarily able to read the article, but you can tell what it is, or if it's a picture of a page or something. But to make that index print usable, useful for you helping to create your book and tell your stories.
The next thing you want to make sure that you have done is that you have indicated either to yourself or to your designer, if you're going to be handing this over for someone else to lay out your book, is to indicate approximately where you want the photos to appear in relation to your text. There are a couple of ways to do this. You can either take your word processing document, write in Word, and you can type in parentheses or in red type, whatever way you want to do that. You can actually type the name of the file name in your document. But one thing that most of our clients find helpful is, again, to have a hard copy of your manuscript. Just print out, just a rough draft copy. Don't worry about how it's formatted or anything. And so you just have your basic text there, and then you can write in the margins which photos should go in this particular place in your text and approximately where you want them. And then you can make more exact decisions as you're doing the layout, or you can leave this up to your designer as far as how these will exactly fit with the text. But at least to have a rough idea of where your pictures should go is very helpful to have before you actually start laying it out. Because if you have to go and make decisions as you're doing the layout of, gee, what picture do I want to put here? And I'm not sure, wait, did I have 2 pictures I want to put here? Or, and if you're chasing around your computer trying to locate photos and find out where they are, it's going to be a lot more frustrating for you. And then if you find at the end of the process that you've forgotten a photo, and then you have to go back and you have to rearrange things, and it gets trickier. So having this laid out and planned out ahead of time is going to make it much, much easier for you to do. You can either do it on paper or in your document itself, but I think a lot of people find it easier to do this with a hard copy, both of to have their index print of their pictures and a hard copy of the text, and make notes on the actual paper. This is kind of a complicated little flow chart that is in the book, How to Save Your Life One Chapter at a Time. And basically, and I won't go through the whole chart here, but basically this is how you can find out, are you really ready to start laying out your book? And it asks you 4 questions. Is your text finished? Are your pictures scanned properly and organized properly? Do you have a caption list, and have you indicated where the pictures go in the text? So this flow chart, if you have the book, refer to that, because that'll tell you, if you don't have some of these completed, where to go to to complete them and how to get that done. Hopefully, as soon as you decided that you wanted to do a book, you've been starting to think about, what do I want this book to look like, as well as what content do I want to have in it. But what do I want the ultimate product to look like? So this is the time when you're going to start zeroing in on those kind of decisions and decide, what do I want this to look like? Do I want what orientation? Do I want it to be a kind of a standard portrait book? Do I want it to be a square book? Do I want to use a landscape book? And there are different reasons that someone might choose different orientations. A portrait book fits really nicely on a bookshelf. It's kind of more of a standard sort of book that most people are looking at. Square is great for, again, if you have a lot of good photos, or even for a textbook, a square can be a really great option. And a landscape is a great option if you have a lot of photographs. If you've done a lot of travel and you have some really good high quality photographs, you can actually do a lot more with those photographs in a landscape book. So that's something you might want to consider. What size do you want your book? Do you want it to be small? Do you want it to be a large, oversized book? So these are the kind of things that you want to be sort of thinking about at this time and make those basic decisions. You definitely want to decide on the size and shape of your book before you start your layout. Some of the other considerations like cover design and that kind of thing you can kind of put off until after you've laid out your book. But as far as the size and shape, you definitely want to button that down before you start your layout.
And Allison may be getting to this point, but it also is important to know the constraints of your particular printer as to what is available as far as the size and the various shapes that you'll be making your book, so that you don't create something and think, oh, this is the wrong aspect ratio, or this doesn't really fit, but so you know what is going to be able to take it from start to finish, and so that you're working in a format that will be printed.
Yeah, and if you are designing your own book and you're having a printer print that for you, definitely check with them and see what their standard page sizes are, because sometimes you may have this great idea for an oversized book, but you need to be aware that that might be more expensive to print per page than a smaller size book. So you need to see what those parameters are. Do I want something that's very simple, or do I want something that's more sophisticated as far as the design of the book? And this goes for both your cover design and also for the interior of the book. What kind of elements do you want to include? Do you want to use a single column in your text, or do you want to use a double, or even if you have a landscape book, you might be using 3 or 4 columns. One thing, and I don't want to get into too much detail about this now, we will be covering this in a future webinar in more detail, but you want to make sure that your text columns aren't too wide to be read comfortably. Generally, I think the sort of rule of thumb for a maximum length of a column that is comfortably readable is 65 characters wide. So if you're doing a book that's larger than 8 inches, like the one on the left is an 8.5 by 11 size book, usually we wouldn't recommend doing a single column in a book that large, because then you start getting to be 100 characters or more in a column, and it sort of is tiring for your eyes to have to travel all the way back to the beginning of a long line to read the next line. But on this particular one, if you have a manuscript that's quite long and you're going to need that extra space, you can do it in a single column, but just make sure that you have maybe a little bit bigger margins or a larger text size, so that you will be able to not make it uncomfortable for your reader to read. I saw a book that a client of ours, that she had hired somebody else to try to lay out her book in Word, and she was doing a landscape book that was like an 11 by 14 size, 14 inches wide, and her designer had laid out a 14-inch column of text, and it was just impossible to read. So so we had to do some redesign there. Double column, if you're doing a larger size book, is a great idea, just because it does make it easier, and it gives you some more room for working with doing interesting things with pictures as well. Do you want your layout to be very simple, or do you want it to be more sophisticated? There are a lot of really great kind of sophisticated design elements that you can incorporate into a book that will just really make it snazzy and look professional. However, what design elements you want to use in your book will greatly determine how your book is going to be laid out and what method you'll use to lay out your book. And a lot of these things that are really great and more sophisticated, you are not going to be able to do in Word or in a less sophisticated design programs. Things such as, you'll see in the background in this photo, there's a picture of New York City in the background that's kind of at a low opacity, and you also have these layers of pictures layered over each other with drop shadows and so forth. And those are things that you're not going to be able to do using a word processing program or a less sophisticated design program. Here are some other things that you know, if you want your text to wrap around an image, if you want, here's another example of the text wrapping around the edge of the fish. If you want to, here's a third example of that. Any of those types of things, you're going to need a more sophisticated design software to handle that, whether you do it yourself or whether you're going to hire someone to do that. It takes a particular sophisticated software to be able to do those kinds of elements in your book. So basically, when you're deciding how you're going to approach this, you ask yourself two questions. First of all, what method am I going to use to design the book, and am I going to do it myself, or am I going to hire a designer? Those are the basic two questions that you have to answer for yourself. And so what we want to give you today are just briefly give you some of the options that you have so that you can make an informed decision. And we are also happy to answer any questions if you have questions about your particular project and how you should best approach this. We would be happy to help you with that too. As far as we're concerned, there are basically three methods that people use to create a book, a self-published book. And in our opinion, only two of them are acceptable. The problem is that the third option, which we think is not a good option, is unfortunately the option that most people try or choose. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But the acceptable ways are, first of all, to use proper design software to lay out your book. And that's either if you're going to do it yourself or if you're going to have someone else lay out your book for you. Or you can also use an online template book creator. So, and there are, many dozens of companies out there that will do that. We are actually developing with our partner an online book creation tool. I think some of you have used sort of our beta version of it, and we will be releasing that permanently very soon. So we will keep you apprised as to when that's going to be happening, and I'll talk to you about some of the things to look out for in that in a moment. In talking about what we call proper design software in order to design your book, what we use is Adobe InDesign, which is a book and large format document layout program. It will do anything you want to do in a book, and all those beautifully sophisticated things that we showed you on these previous pages, it can handle all of that. It's quite expensive and has a relatively steep learning curve, although you can get up to speed in doing some of its simpler things fairly quickly. It's user-friendly, even though it's quite sophisticated. Or some of you, if may be familiar with the program Quark. It's an older program. It's not considered the industry standard anymore, but it was designed to actually do long format books, so that's also an acceptable alternative. If you have a copy of Quark laying around somewhere, by all means, use that if you have it or if you're familiar with that and know how to use it. The other option that you have is desktop publishing software. Pages and Publisher are two just two examples of that. There are new programs coming out all the time for doing that, and we can't really recommend any one. We don't use those programs, so we haven't really kept up on exactly which ones are the hottest things right now. But a few things that you want to keep in mind in looking for a desktop publishing program: you want to make sure that it can handle multiple page documents that have text that flows from page to page, and that you're not just dealing with, you wouldn't want to lay out a book in Photoshop, for instance, because you can only deal with, you'd have to design separate pages, one page at a time. So you want to make sure that it can handle multi-page documents. You want to make sure that you can convert it to a PDF when you're done, because that is the file format that your printer is going to want to print from. So just kind of check it out. A lot of these programs, including InDesign, have free trials that you can download, and so you can try it out and see it before you buy it and see if it's going to work for your project. Just to show you again some of the things that that are available in a program like InDesign that will allow you to do that you cannot do in a word processing program are things like justified text. If you want to have both sides of a text box be lined up nicely, which some people prefer that, other people don't care for it. It's kind of a personal decision. Things like pull quotes. Do you want to pull out a quote to call attention to it and put that in some sort of text box? Automatic page numbers and automatic titles that appear on every page are things that generally Word can do some of that, but not in a very sophisticated way. Doing fancy titling, again, pull quotes, especially text wrap around a photograph. Word says that it can do that, but it doesn't do it well. And if many of you have tried to have text wrap around a photo in Word, and then you make a change to your text, the photos jump around, they don't stay on the pages that they're supposed to. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. So any of these, sophisticated captioning techniques, any of these types of sophisticated design elements, if you want those things in your book, you're going to have to use actual design software to get those effects. And your other option, as I said before, is using an online book creation tool. There are a lot of these companies out there that do that. This is a book that Tom did recently, and it took him, he did put his whole book together in a weekend or less than a weekend, and this was using our design tool software that we are developing right as we speak. And some things to, it made a great looking book. There are definitely some limitations to using an online book software to create your book, and so I'll just take a couple of minutes to talk about some of those limitations. One of those is that basically, the biggest limitation with any online book software is that you have to work in small segments of text. Most, in fact, all of them, as far as I am aware of, they won't flow your text from page to page. So you have to use short blocks of text on a page and lay out each page separately. You also want to think in spreads. You want to be able to look at, go back to this slide, looking at both sides of your page at the same time and see how those are going to look together when you're doing an online book. Online books handle handle photos really well and short blocks of text or photos with captions. So if you're telling a bunch of short stories or kind of reminiscences or something like that where the text is broken up quite a bit, then this is a really good option for you. But it may be a little frustrating if you have a very long narrative and you want it to flow from page to page. Online book software does not quite handle that as well. You can work around it. It's just a little bit tougher to do long blocks of text. You also you don't usually have options as far as like justifying, doing a right justification on a text column, that type of thing. But for shorter books and for books with a lot of pictures and not as much text, it can be a really great option to do your own book in a way that's relatively easy without having to learn a whole new software program. Just some things to be aware of. You want to make sure that your text is prepped pretty well in Word so that you can cut and paste those text segments into your book. Make sure that you have a plan. You can even kind of storyboard your story out and kind of decide ahead of time a little bit what you want on each page and how much text is going to go on each page, and that'll make it easier for you to do your layout within the template constraints. And also you want to make sure that you use a company that that is going to have good customer support. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to develop this tool to help our clients do this. You know, there are some advantages, some things that we have that some other companies don't. But the main thing is that the printing quality of our printer partner is always excellent. And we've had, you know, we've tried out a lot of these photo books from different companies, and sometimes the print quality is great, and sometimes it's not so great. And sometimes even within the same company, especially some of the really large companies, like one that we won't mention by name, but it begins with a B. We've ordered the same book from the same company at 2 different times and gotten back a very different product, because they use so many different printers all over the country that have different quality standards, and so you're never quite sure what you're going to get. So just be aware of that and see what their customer service is like. A lot of the really large book creation companies, you know, if you have a problem with your book and you want to call and get a customer service rep, it's going to be really hard to do that and get some personal service. So just some things to think about in deciding how you want to create your book. If you honestly feel like Word is your only option, or if you say, oh, I don't need all this, you know, I don't need all this fancy design stuff, I'm just going to do my own word processing. We're not going to tell you that it can't be done, because we see books that are done that way all the time. But just some things that you can do that will make it easier for you. First of all, here's the reasons, basically the reasons why you don't want to use word processing to use images. Word processing is great for writing your stories and for getting them down. You know, we use word processing software when we're writing stuff that's going to go into a design book, but we don't use it to put our graphics in. It's not, word processing documents are not designed to handle text or to handle graphics, even though they say they can. They compress it. They compress the images when they are put in. The images don't always stay where you want them to be, and that's probably the #1 frustration that most people have with trying to lay out a book with a word processing software. The typography is not as sophisticated, so if you want to do anything like, you know, if you try to justify your type, you've all seen those columns of text where you have maybe 3 words on a line and you have these big, huge gaps of white space in between the word because it's trying to justify that text, but it's not sophisticated enough to really decide, you know, whether that's going to look good or not. And also, it does really funky things to your images. The one thing you never ever want to do, because we've seen this and it's always a disaster, is that don't scan your photos directly into a word processing document, because it just mangles them. And then you don't have a clean scan to be able to work with outside of Word. Your images basically have to be rescanned if you want to do something else with them. So that's one thing you don't ever want to do. If you must, if Word is your only option, we suggest that you don't add pictures to your text, but that you actually put all your pictures on separate pages. And it's best to do this in Photoshop or some other photo editing software, or even, you know, desktop publishing software. And And so make your picture pages separate and then print them separately and then assemble them together after the printing. And that way you can have control over your images and you can have your text the way you want it in Word. And make sure that you can convert to a PDF if you have created something in Word and you want it to stay looking the same way before you give it to your printer. If you take your Word document and you give it to them, they're going to have to do a bunch of other stuff with it to get it to, and it might not look the same way it looked on your computer because they kind of move around. So you want to make sure that you that you're able to convert your document to a PDF to give to your printer, and that kind of locks everything into place. The biggest advice we can give you is to just make sure that if this is the part of the process that's really hanging you up, get some help to do it, whether it's from a family member or whether you hire a professional. You wouldn't want this part of it to derail you after you've done all this work of writing your stories and getting your photos together. You don't want to just give up in frustration at this point. So make sure that you get help, the help that you need if you need to. Just some considerations on how to decide whether you're going to do this yourself or whether you want to hire a designer. This is just my little graphic of a normal person's brain versus a designer's brain. But here's some questions to ask you to decide whether you want to get someone else to help you do this. First of all, what's your budget? How much can you afford to spend on getting this designed and printed? What are your expectations? If you're really picky and you want it to look really fabulous and you want it to look a certain way and you don't have the skills yourself or the tools to do that, but it's really important to you, you have to weigh that against your budget considerations. How much available time do you have? Do you have time to learn a new software program? Do you have time to put the time into it that might take you a lot longer than it would to have a professional do it? How comfortable are you with computers? You really need to be able to be comfortable on a computer to design a book these days. You know, we're well beyond the cut and paste era with, you know, scissors and glue. So if you're not that comfortable with computers, you're going to need some help doing this yourself. Do you enjoy the challenge of learning new software? Is that something that you think would be fun to sit down and do that? If so, then you're the perfect person to learn how to do this and pick up some new skills. Do you have family members that might have the skills or the proper software and that also have the time to help you and will be able to put some time aside? We've had a number of clients who have asked or even hired their grandchildren who might be working as designers or have some design skills to do that. But sometimes those projects get derailed because their kids or their grandkids they're busy, they have their own lives, they have their own jobs and their families, and they mean really well, but they just don't have the time to get it done within your time frame. So then they bring that to us to get it done in a more timely fashion. So these are just all things to consider as far as whether you want to try to tackle this yourself. That's kind of the whole thing in a nutshell. So at this point, we've thrown a lot of information at you in a short period of time. One thing, so I would love to field any questions that any of you have at this point about frustrations that you've had in trying to get to this point, or questions that you have about how to design a book or how to put this together. We will be, as I said, we're working on this book creation tool software, and it is very close to being released to the general public, and we will let you know when that is ready to go, and that might be a really good option for you. Also, at Pictures and Stories, this is what Tom and I do. This is our full-time job, is to help people get their stories into books. And if you have already gone through the process of all your writing and gathering all your pictures together, and then you just need some help with the design process, we would be happy to help you with that and happy to design it for you. We have a free consultation. We can sit down and look at what you have and give you advice on how to proceed, and we're happy to do that at any time. And we can also give you, a quote on what it would cost to have your book professionally designed, and we'd be happy to talk to you about that at any time. So feel free to call us or email us. Our address is on the screen right now. I have a question from Diane. Could you clarify cell phone photo resolution? Is it compressed on the sender's phone when it is emailed or only on the receiving end? That's a really good question, and I'm not sure that, all these phones are different and they seem to handle it in different ways. Basically, most cell phones are set to, they're set up to take pretty high resolution photos. Like I took a photo on, I have a Samsung Galaxy Note, and took a photo on it yesterday, and it's like 4,000 by 4,000 and something by 3,000 something pixels. That's a really high resolution photo. And I noticed what I did is I emailed it to myself so that I could have access to it on my computer without having to like plug my phone into the computer and get it transferred over hardwired, which I could have done, but I just thought it'd be easier just to email this to myself. But when you email it, you have to make sure that you choose that you want it to send in the original resolution, because the default is going to make it smaller so that the person on the receiving end will get a much smaller file. And this is something we have to tell our clients all the time when they're sending us images from their cell phones, that they have to find whatever setting on their phone will send that as at the original resolution. There may also be some email clients or email programs that will only show you on your screen a smaller version of the photo that's been emailed to you. So you have to make sure that when you're saving that you're saving it onto your computer as a full resolution. And different email clients handle that really differently, but just kind of might have to look deeper at that.
Let me just add there.
Yeah.
As I mentioned before, we mentioned before, there's never been a better time to make a book of your life stories. And one of the things, whether it's cell phones, the cameras you have, the computer, the software, it's just get familiar with the tools that you have and choose to use and make them work for you. It's amazing what you can do with a cell phone now as far as quality pictures, even video, all of these kind of elements. But it's get familiar with those particular tools so that you know how to use them and what you're getting. And one of the ways to tell if it is a good picture is when you open it on your computer with where you're going to lay that out, is to check what is the resolution of this particular photo and understand what you're getting. I also just want to make a point here, Allison. We talked a little bit about there are other elements to designing that we have not covered, and I don't know whether we'll get those in another webinar, that are fonts, that are white space, margins, laying pictures together, combining elements, some of these things that we may want to talk about later.
Yeah, we will definitely be doing another webinar on some of those more the finer sort of technical considerations in designing a book, in the actual design of your book. We will be covering that in future, and we will let you know when that's going to happen. Susan asked the question, how do you charge for designing a book? By the hour or straight fee? How many consultations are normal for getting the originator's expectations? That's a great question, Susan, and we probably do it differently than some other people, but I can just tell you what we do. Basically, if you have all of your information organized, we have a formula that basically, based on how many words you have and how many pictures are going into your book, we have a formula that we can give you a pretty exact estimate on what your book will cost to design. And we can either use our printer to print it, or you can have it printed wherever you like. That's up to you. If there are other things that you need us to do, if we're also helping with text editing, if we're doing any oral interviews, if we are scanning your photos for you, any of that kind of stuff, is on top of that. We also have packages. If you haven't done anything with your stories yet, or you need some help with the story part of it and gathering all that, we have packages where we can do help you with the whole thing, that have individual pricing. And the pricing for the packages is all on our website at picturesandstories.com. Usually we always do a free consultation with anybody that needs help on a book. And that usually takes an hour or so. We're happy to give you advice on how to proceed and let you know what it would cost for us to help you. And then if you decide to have us help with your book, You can bring all your information to us, and generally what I do is or what either one of us do, depending upon who's going to be working on your book, is basically when we start the layout, we'll maybe do the first chapter and then have you look at it to make sure that you like the way it's going so far. So you'll have many chances as we're going along to make sure that you're happy with how it's proceeding, that you like the fonts we're using, you like the page size, and all of those kind of design elements. And then after the book is laid out, then you will get a draft, either an electronic draft or a printed draft, and be able to go through and make corrections, and those, the correction time is also included, so that you basically can take as much time take as much time as you want to be able to look at it and make sure that it's exactly what you want before it goes to print. So you have a great degree of control over the process. Just a couple of things, if you're looking at hiring a designer, or maybe you want to have a college student help you with your book or something like that, those are definitely good options. You just want to make sure that whoever is helping you with this is going to use decent software to do it in. If you're talking to someone who can help design your book and they're going to be using Word to do that, I would just say run, because you're not going to get the results that you want unless they're using the proper design software. So be sure and ask questions of anybody that you might be thinking of hiring or having you help with your book to find out what they use and how they're going to go about doing that, and how much control you'll be able to have over the final product. Kent mentioned LibreOffice is a free program one can download. I use it instead of Word. There are all kinds of free word processing shareware programs that you can use. There's OpenOffice if you don't want to pay for Microsoft Office products. There are all kinds of word processors out there that you can use for free. I've actually started using, I use the document creator in Google Docs quite often, which is all free and it's part of Google. And that way you're writing, you can write in the cloud. So I can go back and forth between my computer and my phone and my iPad with my keyboard, depending upon where I am for writing. Just to be clear though, all of those programs are great for writing your book, for writing your manuscript, for doing any text work, but you don't want to use those programs, any of them, to actually add your images to your book as well. Any other questions out there? We'd love to answer your questions or help you through with this.
I'd just say encourage you to get in and try something and make it work. And sometimes you may have a few frustrations, but that's where you learn and grow. And you'll take your first project, and you'll improve from there. But the key is to get going and do something, and really make it great. But decide what you want to do and make some progress. Amazing the feeling that you'll have and what you'll convey to your readers as they'll be able to understand and know some of the stories of your life or whoever's life you're putting in the pages of that book, whether that be a parent or ancestor or some other person.
Another thing, while we're waiting for any questions that you might have, another thing I just thought I'd throw out there, we've mentioned this a little bit before, but people ask us now frequently about ebooks. Should I make my book as an ebook instead of a printed book? And I think ebooks are a great thing, and I love my Kindle, and I read on it all the time. I read novels on it or things that that aren't design heavy. It's a great option for reading stuff, and it's also a great option to be able to share your book more widely with other people, maybe outside of your small circle. So, especially if you're doing a book on your family history, and you want to be able to share this widely with a wider audience, with people outside your family. An ebook is a great thing to do. You can upload that and share it really easily. However, that being said, I think that if you're going to go to all the work of putting a book together, whether it's an ebook or a printed book, then it's almost just as easy to do both, because a printed book and an ebook are, I mean, it's like saying, you know, which do you like better, ice cream or steak? You know, I mean, they're not really, you can't really compare the two. They both have their important functions. So a printed book is something that you can, it's easy to interact with. You can pick it up, you can leaf through it, you can look at it, you know, from the back going forward. That's how I read magazines. Don't ask me why. It's just a weird quirk I have. But you can just go through it and look at the pictures or maybe read some captions. You don't have to have any software. You don't have to dig it out of a drawer. It's just there. You can leave it on your coffee table, and it's casual interaction. You get that lovely tactile feeling of the paper and turning the pages, and also you have so much more control over the design and how it's going to look. And books are not going away ever. I firmly believe that. All you have to do is go to a bookstore on a weekend, and it's not a ghost town. Those bookstores are busy, and people are not just there buying ebooks. The upside to that is that books are getting much more sophisticated, and they look more beautiful now. That books are really becoming a work of art, not just a vehicle for text. And so having both a printed book and then an ebook version, which may not look as nice, it's not going to be as sophisticated and have all the design elements, but that's easy to share the information. But so both are equally important. Okay, Susan says, I have a lot of newspaper clippings. Is it better to insert the original clipping or just to copy the wording into the text? That depends a lot on the quality of the newspaper clipping. And then she also is asking, what's the best setting to use to scan yellowed clippings? Okay, first of all, I think it's usually interesting to include the original, a scan of the original clipping in your book. If it's hard to read, then you can also just put a column of the text next to it that's easier to read if you want them to be able to actually read what's on the newspaper article. But I think including the original articles, especially if they have pictures or if they're just kind of cool, you know, if they show something of the time, I think it's really neat to include those as a design element as well.
Let me just add just a quick point on the newspaper clippings. There's one thing is it can show the reality, and oh, you were in the newspaper, or your ancestor, or someone was in the newspaper. That's kind of a neat thing. And even if it's yellowed, sometimes that adds an extra effect. That might be a nice thing. It just depends on what you want to have shown in your book. Also, something to be aware in a newspaper clipping is often they write in columns. And so there'll be a column that might be all the way down the side of the page. It might be 2 inches wide and 18 inches long. That's pretty hard to show in its entirety on the page of a typical book. And so you may have to make some adjustments in showing your newspaper clippings in the pages of your book. But lots of things can be done, and I think consider using them as is, as well as calling out and quoting some things with proper attribution is also a good thing in your text.
Yeah, and as Tom said, sometimes even leaving them yellowed is kind of a cool, you know, gives sort of an old-fashioned look. But if you want to, you can either scan them, and I would just scan them as a regular JPEG. Don't try to scan them as a PDF or something. But you can scan them as you would any other photograph or image. But you can scan them using a grayscale setting. And then you can adjust it in Photoshop. You can, you know, adjust the contrast maybe to make the background look a little whiter and not so gray. So there are things that you can do to adjust it in your photo editing software, just like you would a regular photo, that can help it look a little bit better. You don't want to use the black and white setting on your scanner, which will convert everything that's gray into either black or white, because that's going to make the photos not look so good, and also it makes the text not as readable. So either use a grayscale or a color scan of your newspaper clippings. Susan is asking where we're located. We are in Salt Lake City, and we have a studio in our home. We're lucky enough to get to work out of our home, and but we work with people all over the country all the time, so we can work with people remotely as well if you're not in our direct area. Kent is asking, should one worry about copyright problems? The answer to that is always yes, up to a point. even if you are just doing a book for your own use and it's not going to go beyond your beyond your immediate family, you still want to make sure that you respect other people's copyrights. Make sure that if you pull an image off of the internet to use, that it's one that is either in the public domain or that you have permission from the copyright holder to be able to use that. That being said, sometimes it's really difficult to determine that, but if and I'm not a copyright lawyer, so I'm not I'm not going to be able to give anybody any advice. But just be careful about what you use in your books if it's going to be widely distributed, or even if it's going to be narrowly distributed. Carolyn asks, how do you include a handwritten text, i.e. a diary? Do you scan the diary or type the diary? Generally, handwritten text, you're probably going to have to type it if you want it to be transcribed. There isn't really a lot of good options for, scanning handwriting and turning that into editable text. We think it's a really cool thing to actually scan a picture of at least a page or two of the diary to use as a graphic element in your book, but then include also whatever transcription of the text of the diary that you want to make it more readable. But it's really nice, I think, a lot of times to show someone's actual handwriting and what their diary looked like. But generally, you will probably have to type the text if you want to include that text from the diary in your book. If there are no other last-minute questions, we'll go ahead and close here today. Thank you all for joining us. We hope that we've given you some really good information in these webinars. We're happy to answer any questions that you might have. You can email us at the email address on the screen, allison@picturesandstories.com. You can also go to our website. Again, our blog on our website, picturesandstories.com, has all kinds of articles about a lot of these subjects, and we will continue to add more and more as time goes on. So we would invite you to keep in touch. If you have any friends that might be involved in this process or that are thinking of doing a personal history or family history book, feel free to have them go to our website and sign up for our newsletter as well, because we always have a lot of good educational content coming out of our website and in our newsletters. And you can even choose how often you want to receive our newsletters and such. So thank you for being with us today. And if anybody would like to have if you'd like to have a link to watch this webinar again, or if you know somebody else who might be interested in it that wasn't able to join us today, you can email me, and I would be happy to send you that link so that you can view it another time. And also our past